The wind rolled across the wide prairie like a warning, carrying dust, the scent of horses, and the uneasy quiet that settles before trouble begins. Folks who lived out there in the old American frontier understood that silence never came without meaning. It was the kind of land where a single sound could change a life, a single shadow could shift a story, and a single breath could pull a person toward danger or safety. That morning she felt all of it pressing against her chest as she stepped through the dry grass, her dress brushing the ground and her heartbeat moving faster than her footsteps. She had ridden out only to gather herbs near the stream, but something told her she wasn't alone. And the thought stayed with her like a shadow, refusing to let go. She tried to calm herself by focusing on the wide sky, tracing the clouds drifting slow and steady across the horizon. The land was beautiful in its roughness, full of color and quiet strength, and yet fear had a way of growing bigger here. She kept her basket close and moved toward her horse. But the moment she reached for the reins, a crack of dried twigs sounded behind her. She froze. She didn't dare turn yet. Her breath stuck halfway in her throat as she waited for another sound. Then she heard boots scraping against dry ground, heavy footsteps that didn't try to hide. Her fingers trembled. She turned. 3 ranch hands stood behind her. She knew them from the settlement beyond the ridge. They weren't known for kindness, or patience, or even fairness. They were known for trouble. The tallest one carried a rope in his hand, flipping it slow between his fingers, while the other 2 looked at her like she was something they had already decided to take. She swallowed hard and kept her voice steady, though fear tugged at her ribs. "I don't want any trouble," she said. "That's the thing," the tall one replied, stepping closer. "Trouble finds people like you out here alone." She tried to move back toward her horse, but one of them blocked her. They circled her slow, like hunters waiting for the right moment. She felt her stomach twist. She had seen men with eyes like theirs before, and she knew they weren't here for a simple conversation. Her horse snorted, restless, sensing the tension. But even the animal seemed unsure it could help her escape. The tallest man reached for her arm before his fingers touched her. A sharp whistle cut through the wind. The ranch hand flinched and looked toward the sound. So did she. At first, she saw nothing but grass and dust. Then a figure stepped into view between the horses near the slope. He moved with the quiet strength of someone who belonged to the land more than anyone else out there. Long black hair braided down his chest, tribal jewelry against his skin, and the stillness of a man who watched everything. His bare chest showed the marks of battles he had already survived, small tribal tattoos tracing his shoulder. His gaze did not waver. His steps did not rush. He walked like the earth beneath him listened, an Apache warrior. She had seen him once or twice from a distance, riding with his people across the far edge of the plains. Folks whispered about him, calling him dangerous, calling him fierce, calling him the kind of man who didn't back away from anything. No one ever said his name for fear of offending the tribe, but everyone knew his reputation. The ranch hands did too. She saw their bodies stiffen as he approached, and even the tall one lowered his rope without meaning to. The warrior stopped only a few steps away. His eyes moved to her first, checking if she was hurt, then shifted slowly to the men standing around her. The silence stretched tight between them. The ranch hands tried to stand taller, but they couldn't hide their unease. Something in the warrior's presence carried the weight of warning. It's like thunder waiting behind the mountains. "What's your business with her?" he asked, his voice deep but calm. The tall man cleared his throat, trying to recover his confidence. "This is none of your concern." The warrior didn't blink. "Everything happening on this land is my concern." One of the men stepped forward, pointing his chin up in a challenge. "You think you can tell us what to do out here?" The warrior lifted his hand and placed it gently on her arm, touch steady and protective. Her breath caught. She didn't expect him to stand so close, didn't expect the warmth of his hand or the quiet comfort that settled over her the moment he touched her. She had been shaking moments ago, but his presence steadied her, as if saying she wasn't alone anymore. Then the tall ranch hand took another step toward them. That was the moment. Everything changed. The warrior's expression hardened. His voice dropped low, close to a growl, carrying the raw power of someone who meant every single word he spoke. "Take your hands off my woman," he said. his tone sharper than the cold wind running across the plains. With his other arm, he pulled her closer to his chest, holding her firmly against him as if daring anyone to take a step forward. The ranch hands froze. Her breath hitched. She wasn't his woman. They had barely exchanged more than a glance before today. Yet the way he held her, the way he shielded her, made her feel safer than she had felt in years. The warmth of his chest against her back, his steady heartbeat, his strong grip at all made the fear that had been choking her fade, little by little. But his words brought new tension. The tallest ranch hand's face changed color, anger mixing with disbelief. "Your woman," he spat. "She belongs with her own kind, not you." The warrior didn't respond to the insult. He only stared at them, eyes sharp, jaw tight, shoulders squared. His silence felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. The ranch hands exchanged uneasy glances. None of them wanted to be the first to provoke an Apache warrior known for skill, power, and fearlessness. For a moment, she thought the men might back down. Then the shortest one gripped his belt. Knife. Her breath caught again as sunlight flashed on the blade. The warrior's arm around her tightened. The wind shifted. One horse stamped the ground, and the next second felt like the moment before lightning strikes, when the whole world holds its breath at once. No one moved. Not yet, but everyone knew. The stillness couldn't last. Something was about to break. A choice would be made, and whatever happened next would not only shape her fate, but possibly the future of the entire settlement, the Apache camp, and the uneasy peace between them. She felt her heartbeat, pounding against his chest as he whispered something only she could hear. A quiet warning meant to protect her from the danger growing around them. Before she could answer, one of the ranch hands stepped forward with the knife, and everything in the prairie shifted. Ready for the storm about to begin, the ranch hand with the knife tightened his grip, and the metal caught the weak sunlight as if calling attention to itself. The tension between all of them stretched tight, and she could almost hear her own pulse louder than the wind. The Apache warrior shifted his stance, pulling her slightly behind him without pushing or forcing her. His movements were careful, protective, and steady, as if he had done this 100 times before and knew exactly what moment danger would strike. She could feel the solid strength in his back as he placed himself between her and the knife. And though fear still clung to her, some part of her trusted him in a way she didn't fully understand yet. The tall ranch hand cursed under his breath, frustrated that things had turned this way. None of them had expected to find an Apache warrior out on the prairie that morning, especially not one willing to claim a woman from the settlement as his own. The gesture alone would cause talk all across the frontier. Folks would question what she was doing alone out there, why an Apache warrior stepped in for her, and what it meant for the uneasy peace already stretched thin between the community and the nearby tribe. Even she felt the weight of those questions forming, heavier with each passing minute. The man with the knife looked unsure for a moment, but kept moving forward. "You think we're scared of you?" he muttered, though his voice shook. His boots scraped against the dirt, leaving narrow trails behind him. The other two stayed close, shifting between anger and hesitation. The warrior's hand hovered near the small blade at his waist, but he didn't draw it yet. He stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes fixed not on the knife, but on the man holding it. Reading his intentions in a way she couldn't, she wanted to speak, to say something that might stop all of it from escalating, but her voice refused to rise. Her fear wasn't only for herself now. It was also for him. She didn't want blood spilled because of her. She didn't want him harmed. And she didn't want this fight to turn into something larger that would pull both worlds into trouble they couldn't escape from. The warrior took one slow breath. "Leave," he said. The knife holder laughed too loudly, like someone trying to prove he wasn't scared. "She isn't yours. She is under my protection," the warrior replied, his voice steady. "Walk away now." His calmness unsettled the ranch hands more than anger would have. The land around them felt colder, the wind sharper, as if the prairie itself leaned in to listen. The moments stretched long and thin. One wrong step, one wrong word, and it could all break apart. Before anything could happen, sudden thunder of hooves rose behind them. All heads turned as 3 riders approached from the slope. Dust trailed behind the fast horses, and their silhouettes sharpened the closer they came. The ranch hand stiffened. She tensed. But the warrior relaxed just slightly, not letting go of her, but no longer bracing for the same threat. The riders were Apache. All 3 horses slowed at once, stopping in a half circle around the scene. The riders dismounted quickly, 2 younger men and an older one with a face carved by seasons of wind and war. They spoke briefly in their language, their voices low but urgent. She didn't understand the words, but she understood their meaning. They were asking the warrior what had happened, why he stood shielding her, what danger had brought them into this moment. The ranch hands took several steps back. They were outnumbered now, and fear finally replaced their arrogance. The tall one lifted his hands slightly, trying to show he meant no real harm. Though his face carried resentment, "We don't want trouble with your people," he said. "You already caused trouble," the older Apache man replied, his tone cold enough to quiet even the wind. Her heart hammered harder. She knew the history, the fragile peace built on worn promises and reluctant compromise. One wrong event could break it. The ranch hands knew that too. They exchanged looks, and for a second, it seemed they might retreat. But before they could speak again, the older Apache man stepped closer and pointed at the knife. "Drop it." The ranch hand obeyed instantly. The blade landed in the dust, and the warrior nudged it away with his foot. No one picked it up. The tension softened by only a fraction, but the danger didn't vanish. The tall ranch hand forced a quick smile, trying to salvage pride. "We'll go," he said. "No reason for this to get bigger." The Apache men didn't move aside. They waited until the ranch hands backed away to their horses. Before mounting, the tall one stared at her, then at the warrior holding her close. There was anger in his eyes. Not fear anymore, but the kind of anger that grows roots and waits for another day. He spat on the ground near them. "This isn't over," he muttered. The warrior's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The ranch hands rode away fast, dust rising behind them like a warning trailing into the sky. Only when the sound of their hooves faded completely did the warrior loosen his hold around her. He didn't release her right away. His hand stayed steady on her arm, making sure she was safe before letting go. When he finally stepped back, the Apache men studied her with mixed expressions, trying to understand why their fellow warrior had intervened so boldly. She felt her cheeks warm under their gazes, but the warrior gave a quiet signal. Silencing whatever questions they had, "You were in danger," he said to her, as if explaining his actions. "I didn't think anyone was nearby." She replied softly. "You shouldn't be out here alone," the older Apache man said, though without harshness. "This land is not as quiet as it looks," she nodded, knowing he was right. Still, a part of her had always loved wandering these plains. She collected herbs for remedies, helped sick families in the settlement, and often found peace near the stream. But today had shown her how quickly peace could turn into fear. The warrior glanced at her horse. "You can ride back," he said, "but they may circle around and try again." Her breath hitched. She hadn't thought of that. The ranch hands were angry, embarrassed, and foolish. They might blame her, or even worse, blame the Apache warrior for interfering. She felt a knot form in her stomach. The older Apache man exchanged a look with the warrior. "We will escort her until the ridge," he said. "Safer that way." She hesitated. Accepting help from them would cause talk in her settlement, maybe distrust. But refusing meant risking running into the ranch hands again. She lowered her eyes, weighing the fear against what was practical. "I would be grateful," she said quietly. The warrior mounted his horse with graceful ease, then extended his hand to help her up onto hers. His touch was firm and steady, grounding her again. She tried not to stare at him, but her eyes kept moving back to him without meaning to. Something about him felt familiar, not in memory, but in instinct. Like he belonged to a part of her life she hadn't discovered yet. They rode in silence at first, the prairie stretching endlessly around them. The younger Apache riders kept watch on the horizon. The older one stayed close behind, scanning for danger. The warrior rode beside her, matching his horse to hers, never rushing, never falling behind. She finally gathered courage to speak. "Why did you stand up for me so strongly?" He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the trail. "Because no woman should face danger alone," he said. "And because you were not meant to be taken by men like them?" His words warmed her more than the sun overhead, but they also stirred more questions. Why her? Why had he stepped in with such certainty? Why had he called her his woman, even if only to scare the ranch hands? What did he see when he looked at her? Before she could ask any of those questions, he added, "There is more trouble coming. What happened today is only the beginning." Her breath tightened. "Why do you say that?" "Because men like them don't let go," he replied. "And because this land is changing, people are changing. Old peace is drying like water in the heat." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth she did not want to face. The prairie seemed different suddenly, as if shadows stretched further, as if even the distant hills carried secrets she had not noticed before as they neared the ridge. The warrior slowed his horse and looked at her for the first time since they started riding. His eyes were deep, full of something she couldn't quite read, something stronger than worry or duty. "You are not safe yet," he said quietly. She swallowed. "What do you mean?" He looked past her at the settlement far ahead, then back at her again. "There are things you don't know," he said, "about them, about us, and about why you were found today." Her heart skipped. He didn't explain further. The wind rose, carrying distant thunder, and she realized this was only the start of something far bigger than the prairie trouble she thought she understood in the open prairie, and the cluster of wooden buildings that made up the settlement, like a thin line between two worlds that tolerated each other but never truly met. From the top of the ridge, she could see the roofs of the saloon, the small church, the general store, and the scattered cabins. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and the sound of a distant hammer carried faintly on the air. It looked quiet and ordinary, yet after what had just happened, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The Apache riders slowed. The older man raised his hand to stop the group. "We will not go closer," he said. "Your people do not like our horses near their homes." When Apache riders came too near the settlement, folks tightened their grip on rifles and whispered warnings to their children. Fear had grown between the two communities for years. Stories of raids, broken promises, and stolen land traveled from mouth to mouth until nobody knew what was truth and what was anger. She knew there were harsh stories on both sides. Out here on the old American frontier, memory could be as sharp as any blade. The warrior guided his horse closer to hers one last time. "Ride straight into town," he told her. "Do not stop along the way. If those men are waiting, do not confront them alone. Stay where others can see you." She nodded. "Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. For a moment she regretted speaking, afraid he would think her foolish. But he did not seem bothered. He studied her face as if weighing his answer carefully. "There are things I must speak about with my people," he replied. "If they decide to keep the peace, we will meet again. If they decide another way, you will know by the way the land feels." His response unsettled her in a way she could not explain. Another way, to her ears, sounded too close to war. She wanted to ask more, to understand what forces were already moving beneath the surface. But the older Apache man called to him, urging him to leave before anyone in the settlement spotted them. The warrior leaned slightly from his saddle, his voice dropping. "Be careful who you trust in that town," he said. "Danger does not always ride in from the horizon. Sometimes it lives behind wooden walls." Then he turned his horse and rode away with the others, disappearing down the back slope of the ridge. She watched until they vanished from sight, a small ache forming in her chest as the last glimpse of his braided hair and strong shoulders faded into the distance. Only when the wind grew louder than the hoofbeats did she urge her own horse forward and head toward the settlement. By the time she reached the edge of town, the sun had shifted higher, throwing longer shadows across the wooden buildings. A few people turned to look as she rode down the main street. Some nodded in greeting. Others stared a little longer, sensing something off in her expression. She dismounted near the livery, handing the reins to the old stable keeper with a strained smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost." he said, narrowing his eyes. Just a long morning, she answered. Thank you for taking him. She walked toward the small cabin she shared with her uncle. A widowed farmer who had taken her in after her parents died from fever when she was still a girl. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Her uncle sat at the table, sorting worn papers and old land deeds. He looked up, frowning at the worry on her face. You're late, he said. I was close to saddling up and coming after you. She set her empty basket down. I ran into trouble near the stream. His hand stilled. What kind of trouble? She weighed. How much to share? If she mentioned the ranch hands, it would cause one kind of storm. If she mentioned the Apache warrior, it would cause another. Either way, the quiet life she had tried to keep would start to change. But keeping silent felt wrong. Her uncle had always been fair with her. He knew the dangers of the frontier better than most. Some of the ranch hands followed me, she said finally. They meant harm. An Apache warrior and 3 others rode in. They made the men leave. Her uncle's expression darkened. Which ranch hands? She described them. The tall one with the rope, the man who drew the knife, and the third who tried to act brave but looked nervous. Her uncle muttered a harsh word under his breath. I am not surprised, he said. Those men drink more than they think and like to use fear to make themselves feel strong. You should not have been out there alone. She lowered her head. No. I didn't think anyone would bother me. He stood and paced once across the small room. And an Apache warrior intervened, he repeated. Why he was passing through, she said, though she knew it had felt like more than that. He said no woman should face men like that alone. Her uncle's frown deepened. Helping you once is one thing, but if people in town hear that an Apache warrior claimed you as his woman just to turn those cowards back, they will not forget it. Some will say you brought danger here. Some will say he plans to take you from us. Suspicion grows easily in a place like this. Her chest tightened. He only wanted to protect me. He did not harm anyone. It will not matter to men who already fear his people, her uncle replied. And if the tribe believes those ranch hands threaten them through you, they will not forget either. She suddenly felt trapped between 2 worlds that had little trust in each other. To the Apache camp, she might now be seen as under their warrior's protection. To the settlers, she might appear tied to a man from the tribe. She did not ask for any of this, yet here she stood. Right in the middle of a growing conflict, her uncle sighed and softened his tone. I am not angry with you, he said. I am angry with men who think they can take what they want and with a land that always makes us choose sides. You did nothing wrong, but we have to be careful now. He told her not to wander out of town alone for a while. He would go to the sheriff and report what happened by the stream, though he doubted the lawman would do much. The ranch hands were tied to a powerful cattle owner who owned half the grazing land near the river. Money spoke loudly in the frontier settlement. Still, her uncle wanted it known that those men had crossed a line. While he left to speak with the sheriff, she tried to busy herself around the cabin, but her mind kept drifting back to the warrior, to his steady eyes, his calm voice, the way he had pulled her close as if she were already part of his life. She did not know his name, and yet could not shake the feeling that their paths had been linked. Long before that morning, as evening approached, the town's main street filled with voices. Men left the fields and ranches, heading toward the saloon. Women gathered water, tended fires, and called children inside. The old American sky turned shades of gold and rust, and shadows from the buildings stretched long like fingers across packed dirt. She stepped outside, needing air. That was when she noticed a small group of neighbors walking together. Whispering more than talking, they glanced her way, then turned to each other as if sharing something they did not want her to hear. Her stomach sank. Word was already spreading. Later, her uncle returned, his face tight. The sheriff said he will talk to those men, he told her, but he asked more questions about the Apache riders than about the ranch hands. He worries the tribe is planning something. He said they have been seen more often near the river. Maybe they are only watching the land they once used, she said quietly. That may be, her uncle replied. But people here see only the threat. They forget the promises that were made when the army forced the tribe north. They forget that some of those promises were written on paper stacked right here on this table. He tapped the old land deeds without much affection. The truth was that some settlers had grabbed more than they were given, pushing fences deeper into territory once shared. Her uncle had tried to stay within what he believed fair, but he knew not all others had done the same. That night, she slept only in short, restless stretches. Images flashed through her mind, the knife glinting in the light, the warrior's arm around her, the way the older Apache man had looked at her, measuring more than mere gratitude, the tall ranch hand's threat as he rode away. And underneath it all, she sensed something bigger than one frightening moment. Something moving in the distance, like a storm just beyond the horizon, far from town. At the Apache camp, fires burned low beneath the stars. The warrior sat with the older man and several others near the council circle. The scent of smoke and sage filled the air. Younger hunters listened at a distance as the elders spoke in low voices. They discussed the ranch hands, the woman, and the pattern of events along the frontier. Cattle driven where they were not allowed. Men firing shots too close to tribal hunting paths. Broken agreements that piled up like dry branches. Some argued that they needed to teach the settlement a lesson. Others warned that an open clash would bring the army back with guns and steel. The warrior listened, his gaze on the flames, remembering the fear in the woman's eyes and how she had leaned back against his chest for safety. "She is not our enemy," he said quietly. "But those men might use her to draw us into a fight. They think we will act without thinking when a woman is harmed. They want an excuse to claim we are the problem." One of the younger warriors bristled. "Are we to do nothing while they threaten our women and theirs?" The older man raised his hand for calm. "We will not move in anger," he said, "but we will not ignore this either. The land is already restless. There is talk of more settlers coming, more fences, more roads. If war comes, it will not be like before. It will be worse." They decided to send a small group to watch the settlement from a distance, to keep track of the ranch hands and any talk of the tribe. The warrior was chosen to lead, partly because he had already stepped into this trouble, and partly because he knew how to move unseen along the ridge and river, back in the town. The 3 ranch hands gathered that same night in the dim light of the saloon's back room. The tall one nursed his pride with every swallow of cheap whiskey. He hated the memory of stepping back when the Apache riders appeared. Hated being forced to drop his knife. Hated the thought of people in town whispering that he had been bested on open ground. "He humiliated us," he said. "In front of her. In front of anyone who hears the story, I will not let that stand." The man who had held the knife rubbed his bruised pride as well. "The sheriff came by," he muttered. "Asked questions about what happened at the stream. He did not say much, but I could see it in his eyes. He believed her. Now we look like bullies and fools." "What are you thinking of doing?" the third man asked. The tall one leaned forward, eyes hard. If she had not been there, none of this would have happened. If the Apache had not decided she was his woman, he would not care so much. That gives us 2 choices. Break his pride by taking something of his, or make the town turn against her so he cannot protect her at all. His words settled across the table like cold steel, out on the dark prairie. Somewhere between camp and settlement, the warrior lifted his head. Feeling a shift in the night air he could not yet name. He had saved her once, but he knew danger had a way of changing shape. It could travel across distance, slip through town doors, and whisper into weak hearts. He tightened his hand on the leather reins and wondered how long the fragile line between their 2 worlds could hold before it tore apart. The prairie night rolled in with heavy clouds, swallowing the last light of the setting sun. The settlement grew quieter as lamps flickered on inside wooden cabins, turning the dusty street into a narrow trail of warm glow and long shadows. She sat by the small window of her cabin, staring out into the dim air, unable to rest. Every breath carried the memory of the Apache warrior's warning. Every heartbeat reminded her of how close the danger had come. And every silence in the room felt too sharp, as if something outside was listening. Her uncle moved around the table, pacing slowly with his hands behind his back. He had barely spoken since returning from the sheriff's office, deep in thought about the growing tension between settlers and the Apache tribe. Finally, he stopped and looked at her. "You are certain they didn't follow you into town, yes?" she whispered. The Apache riders stayed behind the ridge. They wouldn't risk coming closer. That's not who I'm worried about, he said. Those ranch hands will not let this go. The sheriff said he warned them, but warnings only work on men who care about consequences. She lowered her gaze. I didn't want trouble. Trouble finds good people out here, her uncle replied. Especially when land and pride get mixed in. He sat across from her, shoulders heavy with concern. We need to stay alert. If anything strange happens, you stay inside and come get me. She nodded, but worry lingered in her chest. As the wind grew stronger, carrying dust against the window panes, she couldn't help wondering where the warrior was at that moment. Whether he was watching from the hills or sitting near a fire in his camp planning what to do next, she wondered if he felt the pull of danger the same way she did, tugging at them both in different ways, far outside town. Beneath the wide-open sky, the warrior rode along the ridge with 2 other Apache scouts. The moonlight painted faint silver lines across the land. They moved silently, following the tracks of the ranch hands that cut through the tall grass. The warrior stopped near the stream where the confrontation had taken place. The ground was disturbed. Boot prints crowded the dirt. He crouched and touched the earth, feeling the faint edges of movement. The anger pressed into each heavy step. They returned, one of the younger scouts said. The warrior nodded. They watched from the trees after we left. They waited until she rode away. They will come again. The other scout looked toward the settlement lights in the distance. Do you think they mean to harm her? They mean to dishonor us, the warrior said quietly. And she is the closest path. The younger scout frowned but did not argue. The warrior stood and turned his horse toward a narrow ridge that overlooked the entire valley. If trouble was coming, he wanted to see it before it touched the settlement. He felt a strange pull in his chest, not only an urge to protect his people, but also a need he could not easily explain, one tied directly to her safety. The wind brushed against his braids, and he tightened his grip on the reins. Sensing the night shifting once again, back in the settlement, her uncle had finally gone to bed, though she doubted he found real rest. She stepped outside for a moment, needing fresh air to quiet the pounding in her head. The moon hung low and pale. The prairie stretched out in silence. Most houses were dark. Only the saloon still had lamps glowing behind its dusty windows. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and listened. A horse whickered from the livery. A dog barked once before settling. The night felt too still, like the calm that settles just before something cracks. She started back toward the cabin, but before she reached the door, she heard footsteps. She turned quickly. A figure stepped from the edge of the shadows. She gasped, stepping back until her shoulders touched the wall. But as the figure came closer, the moonlight revealed a worn hat, a long coat, and a familiar face from the settlement. It was the town deputy. He raised a hand to show he meant no harm. Didn't mean to startle you, he said. Your uncle told me what happened. Sheriff wants to keep an eye on things tonight. She exhaled slowly, though her pulse stayed high. I thought you were someone else. Yeah, you're safe here, he assured her. But keep your door bolted. If any trouble starts, holler loud, and we'll be here fast. She thanked him. He tipped his hat and moved along the street, checking corners and alleys. She watched until he disappeared behind the general store. She went back inside, locked the door, and rested her head against it, forcing her breath to settle. Yet even with a lawman nearby, a deep part of her felt exposed. Something inside whispered that the danger wouldn't come from the obvious path. It would come from where people least expected it. Hours passed before sleep finally claimed her. But sleep didn't stay long. A sharp knock jolted her awake. Her heart leaped into her throat. Before she could react, her uncle appeared from his room. Boots huffing, eyes wide. Stay back, he whispered. He approached the door cautiously. Who is it? A man answered, sounding out of breath. It's the deputy. We found something by the east fence. Need you to take a look? Her uncle hesitated, then lifted his lantern and opened the door just enough to peer out. She stepped closer to see who stood on the other side. It was the deputy, stirred on his boots, hand resting on his belt. What happened? Her uncle asked. Tracks, the deputy said. Fresh ones. Look like they circled the settlement twice. Her uncle gritted his teeth. Those ranch hands again. That's what we're trying to confirm, the deputy said. Sheriff wants you to see something. Her uncle nodded, reaching for his jacket. Stay inside, he told her firmly. She wanted to argue. She wanted to ask what kind of tracks could send a deputy knocking on doors so late. But before she could speak, the deputy said, We won't be long. The door closed behind them. She waited, nerves tight as rope. But as minutes passed, something felt wrong. Too long, too quiet. She stepped to the window and pushed the curtain aside just enough to see out. The street was empty, no lantern glow in the distance, no sign of footsteps, no movement at all. An icy shiver crawled across her skin. She unlocked the door and stepped outside, calling softly for her uncle. No answer. A dark feeling gripped her. She hurried toward the east fence, hoping they had gone ahead, but halfway there, she froze. Her breath caught in her chest. A lantern lay on its side in the dust, still warm. Footprints circled around it. Not ranch hands. Not Apache. Something else. Something disturbed. And then she saw it. A rope cut clean in the dirt, as if it had been pulled from someone's hands during a struggle. She gasped and spun back toward the cabin. Panic rose through her like fire. She didn't know whether to run to the sheriff's office or scream for help. Her uncle was gone. The deputy was gone. Something terrible was happening, and she had walked straight into the middle of it before she could decide what to do. The unmistakable thud of hooves echoed from the ridge. A horse approached at full speed, its silhouette cutting fast across the horizon. She stepped back, unsure whether to run or stay. Then she recognized him. The Apache warrior rode down the slope, like a storm breaking through clouds, his braids whipping in the wind, his bare chest gleaming under moonlight. Tribal jewelry catching the light with each stride. His horse kicked up dust, as powerful and unwavering as he guided it straight toward her. He pulled the reins hard, stopping only feet away. He dismounted in one swift motion. You should not be alone, he said, voice breathless but steady. Her fear cracked open. My uncle is gone, she said. The deputy came for him, but I think something happened. They didn't go where they said. He studied the ground, the marks, the broken rope. His expression darkened, muscles tightening across his shoulders. They took him, he said, to draw you out, and to get to me. Her knees nearly buckled. Why? Because this land is full of men who want control, he answered. Control of grazing. Control of water. Control of fear. And now, they believe taking your uncle will force both sides into a fight. Her breath shook. What do we do? He stepped close, placing a steadying hand on her arm. His voice lowered, full of certainty and danger. We go after them, he said. But this time, they expect us to come. They want a confrontation. She felt her heartbeat in her throat. Will we be too late? He held her gaze, eyes burning with a fierce promise. Not if we move now. The night wind rushed past them. Somewhere beyond the ridge, men waited with plans that could break the fragile peace entirely. The settlement slept unaware. The Apache camp watched from the hills. Her uncle's life hung in the balance, and she stood beside a warrior who had already risked more than she understood. He mounted his horse and reached a hand down to her. Ride with me, he said. This is where everything changes. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. He pulled her up onto the horse, settling her in front of him as he wrapped one protective arm around her waist. The other gripped the reins. Then he whispered near her ear with quiet determination. Hold on. The horse surged forward, carrying them into the darkness where danger waited, where lives would collide, and where the final moments before the storm were beginning to gather. Strength the horse carried them fast across the prairie, cutting through the cold night wind as if the land itself urged them forward. She held on to the Apache warrior tightly, heart pounding with worry for her uncle and for everything that had unfolded between the settlement and the tribe. The moon guided their path, casting pale light across the rolling ground and the lonely ridges. The warrior leaned close, watching the land with the eyes of someone who understood every shadow and track. When they reached the far ridge, he slowed and raised his hand for silence. The prairie grew still. She listened hard, trying to catch any sign of movement. Then she heard it. Faint voices carried by the breeze, coming from the old abandoned barn near the dry creek bed. A lantern flickered inside. The warrior looked at her with a steady calm that made her feel braver than she felt moments earlier. "They brought him here," he said. "Stay close behind me. No matter what happens, you stay where I tell you." She nodded, trusting him without hesitation. They approached quietly, moving between tall grass and broken fence posts. As they drew closer, she saw the figures inside the barn. The tall ranch hand, paced with a rifle in his grip. The other two stood near her uncle, who sat tied to a wooden post, but unharmed. Relief washed over her when she saw he had no injuries, though his expression told her he knew how serious the situation had become. The tall ranch hand slammed his boot against the floorboards. "He'll come," he growled to the others. "That Apache thinks he owns everything he touches. He thinks he can claim land and women and do as he pleases. Tonight we show him he's wrong." Her uncle lifted his chin and glared at him. "You dragged me out of my home to pick a fight with a man who did nothing wrong." "What?" the ranch hand sneered. "You settlers always think you're better than the tribes, but you'll see. Once we force the Apache to act, the sheriff will bring the soldiers. The tribe will be pushed out for good." Hearing those words sent a cold wave through her. This was bigger than pride. It was about driving fear into the town, stirring conflict, and breaking the fragile peace that had held both communities together for years. She looked at the warrior and saw the understanding in his eyes. He knew the same thing. If the ranch hand succeeded, everything changed. Not just for her, but for the entire frontier. The warrior motioned for her to stay hidden behind the broken fence. Then he stepped out from the shadows and approached the barn with slow, deliberate steps. The ranch hands turned at once, surprised by his boldness. The tall one lifted the rifle, but the warrior stopped him with a single glare that froze the moment in place. "You wanted me," the warrior said. "I am here. Release the man." The tall ranch hand widened his stance. "You don't give orders out here. You brought him to this place," the warrior replied. "You want to fight? But you will not harm him." The tension between them built like a tightrope, ready to snap. She watched from the shadows, gripping the fence so hard her fingers turned white. Her uncle shouted at the ranch hands, telling them to think about what they were doing, but they ignored him. The tall one steadied his aim. Before he could pull the trigger, the warrior moved fast, faster than she thought possible. He slammed his hand against the barrel and pushed it aside. The shot fired harmlessly into the rafters. The sound echoed through the prairie, startling birds from the trees. Chaos broke loose. One ranch hand lunged forward, swinging a rope, but the warrior ducked and sent him to the ground. Another tried to grab the fallen rifle, but she ran from her hiding place and shoved it with her foot. Sending it sliding across the barn floor, her uncle called her name. His voice filled with fear and pride all at once. The tall ranch hand snarled and rushed at the warrior with anger burning in his eyes. They collided hard, kicking up dust. The barn rattled with the force of their fight. The warrior blocked blows, dodged swings, and fought with the strength and calm of someone who had faced danger many times before. Every move he made was controlled, not out of rage, but out of necessity. But the tall ranch hand was desperate. He grabbed a broken plank and swung with all his weight. The warrior stepped back, but the edge grazed his shoulder. She gasped as she saw blood streak across his skin. Fear rose inside her, deep and sharp. She wanted to run to him, but her uncle shouted for her to stay back. The ranch hand swung again. This time the warrior caught the plank, twisted it out of his grasp, and threw it aside. Then, with one solid movement, he forced the tall man to the ground, pinning him with a knee against his chest. The other two ranch hands crawled back to the wall, defeated and breathless. The fight was over. Silence filled the barn. The lantern crackled on its hook. Dust drifted slowly in the air. The tall ranch hand stared up at the warrior, chest heaving, sweat mixing with anger and shame. The warrior spoke in a calm, firm voice. "This land will not bend to men who use fear, and it will not be ruled by those who spread lies." Her uncle nodded from where he sat tied. He's right. You nearly broke every family in this settlement with your foolishness. The tall man scoffed weakly. People like you always take their side. No, her uncle answered. I take the side of what is right. The warrior stood and walked to her uncle, cutting the ropes with a small blade. She rushed to her uncle's side and hugged him tightly. He held her close, whispering that everything was fine now. But she knew the peace needed more than a few words. They escorted the ranch hands outside. Under the moonlight, the warrior stood tall as he looked out across the prairie. The tension that had ruled the last days felt lighter, but not gone. She approached him quietly, her heart full of gratitude and something deeper she had not dared to name. I'm glad you came, she said. He looked at her with gentle eyes. I told you that you were not safe. I meant it. Her uncle joined them, brushing dust from his sleeves. We need to take these men to the sheriff, he said. After tonight, the town deserves the truth. The tall ranch hand hung his head. He had no more fight left in him. The other two followed silently as her uncle led them toward town. The warrior walked beside her, his arm brushing hers, steadying her after all the fear. When they reached the settlement, lights flickered on as people woke to the commotion. The sheriff stepped out, rifle in hand, but when he heard everything that happened, his stern expression softened. He ordered the ranch hands locked in the saloon's storage room for questioning at dawn. As the crowd gathered, whispers turned to relief when they learned the truth. People thanked the warrior for stepping in. Others apologized for their own doubts. Even the sheriff admitted the tribe had been blamed for too many things they didn't do. A fragile but real peace began to settle over the town like a warm blanket. Her uncle placed a hand on the warrior's shoulder. You saved us, he said, and you kept our home from turning into a battlefield. The warrior nodded. Your people and mine both deserve peace, not fear. She stepped closer to him, feeling the pull she had felt since the first moment he stood at her side. Will you stay for a while? She asked softly. He looked at her with a warmth that eased every worry she carried. If you want me to? I do, she said. He smiled the quiet, strong smile of a man who belonged to the land but had found something worth staying for. She reached for his hand, and he took it gently, his touch warm and steady. Together, they walked down the street as dawn began to rise. The sky shifted from dark blue to soft gold, painting the prairie in colors of hope. The fear that once threatened their world felt far away now, replaced by the promise of a stronger bond between their people and a new beginning built on trust and courage. Her uncle watched them with a knowing smile. The townsfolk whispered about the Apache warrior walking beside her, but their voices carried no judgment anymore, only curiosity and respect. The land felt lighter, as if the old frontier had taken a long breath and finally let go of its tension. She leaned against the warrior as the first. Rays of sunlight touched the hills. In that moment, she knew the danger had passed. The wounds were healing. The future was beginning to open in a way she never expected. She had found safety, peace, and something far stronger than fear, and she knew she would walk wherever life led. With the Apache warrior by her side, ready to face every sunrise together on the land that had nearly torn them apart, but instead brought them home.